Afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. You who are here in person and the folks who are joining us via the live stream, it is our privilege to welcome you in person or online to St. Mary's College. My name is Molly Gower, and I serve as the Vice President for Mission. Today, I am here to welcome you on behalf of the Center for the Study of Spirituality at St. Mary's College. Just a few words about the center. Founded in 1984 by Keith Egan, with support of both the Sisters of the Holy Cross and the college, the Center for the Study of Spirituality offers programs that promote the engagement between faith and reason and the connection between body, mind, and spirit. As an academic center, it is a hub for scholarly and public engagement, drawing on intellectual resources in the Catholic and broader Christian tradition, as well as how individuals practice their faith in their daily lives to support critical conversations around contemporary religious issues, especially as they relate to women's experiences in society, the academy, and the church. I am delighted to welcome you to today's lecture. Before we proceed with our event, we wish to acknowledge that we are standing on sacred land. We wish to acknowledge and honor the Native people and their traditional homelands on which we stand. We particularly recognize the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and the Miami, who have been utilizing this land and its resources for many years and who continue to do so today. With deep gratitude, we acknowledge the Native people and their culture within our community, as well as acknowledging the land upon which we gather, pray, learn, and work. Our program this afternoon will include a talk, followed by some conversation together and opportunity for question and answer. So it should be about an hour or so in all. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Catherine Punsalan-Manlimos to St. Mary's College. Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos serves as Vice President for Mission Integration at Seattle University. Having completed her PhD in Systematic Theology at the University of Notre Dame, alongside our own Dr. Stacy Davis, Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos began her teaching career at a Jesuit university, one of 5 in the Philippines, where she was a member of the theology department and taught courses at the undergraduate level and in the Formation Institute for Religious Education. Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos was an associate professor in the Theology and Religious Studies department at Seattle U for 15 years. She was the inaugural director of the Institute for Catholic Thought and Culture, and she held the Malcolm and Mari Stamper Endowed Chair in Catholic Intellectual and Cultural Traditions. In addition, she directed the Catholic Studies program in the College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos has won awards for her teaching and for her research, and is past president of the Pacific Northwest AAR SBL, American Academy of Religion, Society of Biblical Literature. She has served on the board of the College Theology Society, as well as on the administrative team of the Asian and Asian American Theology Consultation of the Catholic Theological Society of America. I am so pleased that Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos has agreed to join us at St. Mary's to consider together the mission of the Catholic College to incarnate love. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Punsalan-Manlimos.
Thank you, Molly, for that generous introductions. And I want to thank Julia Feder, who also was the first to reach out to me and give me this opportunity to be with all of you this afternoon. And of course, Jessica Williams for all of the work she's done to bring us all together. I wanted to begin, as I listened to Molly's introduction, thought, let me just take this opportunity, if my iPad will allow me, to begin with something of a poem as a kind of prayer that I absolutely love and I think fits very well into the title I decided to choose for this time together. It's one of my favorite poems, and the invitation came to me, I should note, during the season of Advent. Thus, the call to Incarnate Love felt like the right title. I know we're in a different liturgical season now, nevertheless. This is a poem that guides me during the Advent season. I come back to it year after year. It's Denise Levertov's Annunciation. We know the scene. The room variously furnished, almost always a lectern, a book, always the tall lily. Arrived in solemn grandeur of great wings, the angelic ambassador standing or hovering, whom she acknowledges a guest. But we are told of meek obedience. No one mentions courage. The engendering spirit did not enter her without consent. God waited. She was free to accept or to refuse, choice integral to humanness. Aren't there annunciations of one sort or another in most lives? Some unwillingly undertake great destinies and act them in sullen pride, uncomprehending. More often, those moments when roads of light and storm open from darkness in a man or a woman are turned away from in dread, in a wave of weakness and despair, and with relief. Ordinary lives continue. God does not smite them, but the gates close, the pathways vanishes. She had been a child who played, ate, slept like any other child, but unlike others, wept only for pity, laughed in joy, not triumph. Compassion and intelligence fused in her indivisible. Called to a destiny more momentous than any in all of time, she did not quail, only asked a simple, how can this be? And gravely, courageously took to heart the angel's reply, perceiving instantly the astounding ministry she was offered. To bear in her womb infinite weight and lightness, to carry in hidden finite inwardness 9 months of eternity, to contain in slender vase of being the sum of power, in narrow flesh the sum of light. Then bring to birth, push out into air, man-child, needing like any other milk and love, but who was God. This was the moment no one speaks of, when she could still refuse. A breath unbreathed, spirit suspended, waiting. She did not cry, I cannot, I am not worthy, nor I have not the strength. She did not submit with gritted teeth, raging, coerced. Bravest of all humans, consent illumined her. The room filled with its light, the lily glowed in it, and the iridescent wings. Consent, courageous, unparalleled, opened her utterly. That poem is something that I've reflected with over the months as I prepared for this time together. But I think about that poem and the notion of call in the context of a question that I find myself thinking about all the time, and a question that I want to spend my time with you this afternoon thinking about. And that's the question of what is the mission of a Catholic college or university? As my title makes explicit, I believe the mission of a Catholic college is to incarnate love. I don't think this is a particularly revolutionary claim. Since Catholic educational institutions were founded as a response to how communities of men and women believed God was calling them to live out their charisms, the particular gift given to them to help build up the people of God and serve the world. The real question is, what does it mean for a Catholic college, especially a Catholic women's college, to incarnate love amid a precarious cultural, social, and political moment? To offer a response to that question, I want to structure my reflections this afternoon according to 5 movements. First, I situate my reflections in my own formation during a particular turbulent historical moment. Second, I recall the tradition that shaped institutions like St. Mary's, especially the pioneering role of women religious, to be followed by offering a theological grounding for the claim that to educate is to make God's love visible in history. Fourth, I name elements of our present reality that render the claim of a God of love difficult for many. Finally, I propose institutional commitments through which Catholic colleges can incarnate love for this time and place. Or at least that's what I'm going to try to do. So my more than 35 years in Catholic higher education began, as Molly noted, as an undergraduate in the Philippines, scarcely a year after the People Power Revolution ended the 20-year dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. What began as a democratically elected government would become a repressive dictatorship with rampant corruption that further concentrated wealth, led to civil unrest, and saw the death and disappearance of those who opposed the government or were an inconvenience to the oligarchy. This was devastating for a very young democracy. The Philippines had just become an independent democratic country 2 decades before Marcos's election. In the years leading up to that moment, men and women religious who led Catholic colleges and universities, often alongside their students, stood on the front lines, resisting systemic dehumanization and standing with those most vulnerable to economic exploitation and political violence. That is the context that formed me. Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in September 1972, just short of a year after the Synod of Bishops, where a group of bishops from around the world declared that, and I quote, "Action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as a constitutive dimension of preaching the gospel." Or in other words, of the Church's mission for the redemption of the human race and its liberation from every oppressive situation, end quote. The mission of Catholic colleges is a participation in the mission of the Church, which is a participation in the mission of Jesus, God's love incarnate. Like many of my peers, I initially understood college primarily as preparation for a career, so the undergraduate me. My faith was something personal and private, and social concern was secondary. Catholic higher education disrupted that narrow frame as I encountered a form of learning that wove together my intellectual development, spiritual growth, and commitment to justice and civic engagement. My experience of Catholic higher education helped me to realize that college was not simply a means to a lucrative career, but an opportunity to discern my vocation. I learned to ask questions of meaning and purpose. I went from choosing a major based on employability to wondering what God was calling me to do with my life. I started as a double major in physics and computer engineering. This was 1987, and found myself unexpectedly falling in love with theology, an interest that opened a life path of what brings me life, what awakens my passions and sparks my curiosity. Theology courses allowed me to examine my received faith and reflect on what it demanded of me. Retreats and student organizations taught me the importance of cultivating my spiritual life and discerning the invitations present in my everyday experiences. I began college as a young adult who had drifted away from Catholicism and found myself attending daily Mass by my senior year. I credit the theology courses that helped me see how human reason can enrich faith and how faith, in turn, can deepen the questions I was asking as my courses in the natural and social sciences revealed more about how the world works. I was surrounded by exemplars of the fruits of this holistic education. I had a physics professor who lived among the working poor. He drew on his scientific, philosophical, and theological training when he presided at liturgy. My history professor served as my spiritual director during my first 8-day silent retreat, They modeled for me the integration of the intellectual, spiritual, civic, and cultural. They were the ones who introduced the possibility of graduate school to me. A first-generation college student, I had no idea what graduate school was. All I knew then was that I needed to finish college if I hoped to have a better life than my working-class parents. Through courses across the sciences, social sciences, and humanities, physics, chemistry, economics, political science, history, literature, theology, philosophy, my world grew larger and more complicated. I learned to ask questions, to resist simplistic answers, and to value the interdisciplinary lens a liberal arts education offered. This lens helped me discern more effective responses to inequity and marginalization. I came to appreciate that intellectual work, coupled with encounter and relationship, leads to more meaningful and effective responses to social problems than impassioned but unexamined ideological reactions. I'd always hoped to make a difference in the world and had drawn to activism. My academic work and experiences in student organizations taught me the importance of understanding root causes and the interlocking systems that shape social problems. In time, I came to see my classroom learning as essential to my aspirations for contributing to genuine and effective social change. Retreats and student communities invited me to nurture a spiritual life, attentive to God's invitation in the concrete circumstances of my community and the world. Over time, a crucial shift occurred. I moved from seeing education as a pathway merely to a profession to understanding it as a space for vocational discernment. I began to ask not only what can I do, but also what is God calling me to do in my life. Now, I could not have articulated it then, but I now recognize that this whole person in education, again, intellectual, spiritual, moral, and civic, reframed my aspirations. My courses became more than requirements. They became ways of understanding how the world works and how I might participate in its renewal. And the integration I experienced was not accidental. It grew out of a rich tradition, a tradition witnessed by men and women's religious communities who founded schools to make God's love incarnate. That is, concrete, enfleshed to their students and the communities they serve. Across the United States, women religious established schools, hospitals, and social ministries in response to the pressing needs of the context they found themselves in. Many moved from running schools that prepared members of their communities to become nurses, teachers, and social workers to robust liberal arts colleges that welcomed lay women. While some ecclesial leaders in the early days hoped these colleges would simply form women to sustain Catholic families, the sisters envisioned more. Institutions where women could discover their gifts and deploy them for the transformation of the world. Of course, St. Mary's College stands in this lineage. Sister Madalena Wolfe, for example, famously promised that a St. Mary's education would help students, and I quote, discover yourself, the universe, and your place in it. So I wanted to learn more about the Sisters of the Holy Cross, and I somehow landed on the National Archives, which described the Sisters of the Holy Cross as dedicated, and I quote, dedicated to education for liberation among children, youth, women, and those underserved in society. And the mission still holds because I found on your website that the mission of St. Mary's is understood to be an academic community where students develop their talents and prepare to make a difference in the world. Catholic women's colleges have helped women recognize their gifts, become aware of their call to share these, and form graduates capable of making God's love visible in schools and clinics, in factory floors and in courtrooms, in neighborhoods and boardrooms, in homes and in offices. When we consider why so many women's colleges were founded, a through line emerges. They were spaces for incarnating love and preparing young women to incarnate love in all the spaces they are called to occupy. So to claim that a Catholic college is called to incarnate love is to situate the institution within God's own mission. God's self-gift takes flesh in Jesus Christ. The church participates in that mission across time and place, and Catholic higher education shares in the mission through its particular work of teaching, research, and service. The question, what does that look like? The question is, what does that look like in our time? For St. Mary's, for each of you who are part of St. Mary's community. It seems appropriate at this point to turn to the one whose historic yes to God's call to incarnate love, Mary, shows us the way, and that's why I wanted to begin with that poem by Denise Levertov. Mary's Annunciation offers an icon for individual and institutional discernment. And by discernment, I mean listening to God's invitation, God's call, the movement of the Holy Spirit. Luke's gospel tells us of a young woman visited by an angel and bearing God's invitation to her, right? And Denise Levertov paints just such a beautiful picture of what that looks like. In the gospel and in the poem, Mary's response to God is marked by attentiveness, freedom, courage, and availability. She listens. She asks a real question. How can this be? And then freely consents to participate in God's work of making love visible in the world, present in the world. Her Magnificat, a little bit further in Luke, tells us about the God to whom she gives her yes. She proclaims a God who scatters the proud, lifts up the lowly, and fills the hungry with good things. In Mary, we glimpse the contours of incarnating love, attention to God's initiative in God's presence, in God's creation, and in God's people, honest inquiry into what is possible while remaining open to what may in the moment be inconceivable or even impossible. I mean, come on. Think about Mary's situation. Courageous consent, rooted in profound hope and trust in God, and a preferential love for those who are poor, excluded, or forgotten, because God, throughout salvation history, shows a special concern for these. So again, in Denise Levertov's poem, The Annunciation, she captures the moment of Mary's response to her call as luminous consent, not reluctant submission, courageous openness that lets grace flood an ordinary room. Levertov asks in the poem, aren't there annunciations of one sort or another in most lives? You've heard the poem, and I think we can change that a little bit and ask, aren't there annunciations that come to institutions? There are moments, as she tells us, when pathways open, roads of light and storm, and we can turn away in dread or step forward in faith. The vocation of a Catholic college is to cultivate habits of discernment so that when those moments arrive, the institution is able to respond with courageous consent. This is possible if members of the college community cultivate the habit of attention to God's presence and call in the day-to-day. The Marian posture is not sentimental. It names practices, attention and listening, especially across difference, rigorous inquiry that welcomes truth from every discipline and encounter, freedom formed by faith and reason, courage to say a costly yes, and a steadfast orientation towards those on the margins. These are the practices through which an institution participates in God's work of making love incarnate, concrete. These are the practices an institution is invited to cultivate in all its members. So what does this practice look like? What does this idea look like in practice? So as Molly kind of narrated my CV a little bit there, you know that my experience now in Catholic higher education has been in very different contexts. First Manila, then South Bend, then Seattle, Detroit, and Seattle again. What I learned over 3 decades across continent and ocean is that the answer to the question begins with attention to context. The context of our students, of our institution, of our community, and our current historical moment. There's a meditation in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola that I often feel drawn to pray when I want to anchor myself in what is really happening around me. In it, Ignatius invites the person praying to imagine seeing the world the way God sees it, to picture God looking down on the whole of the earth and the whole of humanity. And then he asks the person to wonder, what does God see? Ignatius invites the person to take in the joys and hopes of people everywhere, their fears and anxiety. He invites them to see moments of birthing and dying, the fullness of life as it unfolds. It is a simple exercise, but it gently shifts our perspectives. It asks us to look at the world as it really is, in all its complexity, with the same compassionate, loving gaze that God turns towards us. There's so much beauty and joy in our world, but when I pray with this particular meditation, I often find my gaze landing on those places and realities in our world where the very idea of God, who is love, becomes difficult to perceive, to comprehend. Those places and circumstances where God longs to bring God's extravagant healing love. If we listen to what surveys and studies tell us about young people today, some of those places that make it challenging to believe in God, in a God of love, who desires to be present among us, might be closer than we think, perhaps even in our own classrooms. I cannot speak for St. Mary's, but I can tell you what I hear from colleagues at Seattle University. Many students struggle to hope. Some tell us they cannot imagine their future, much less a reconciled world. This is not a failure on their character. It is a reflection of the world they have inherited, a world where violence, division, and uncertainty often feel more real than the promise of healing and wholeness. And so the question becomes, how do we as Catholic educators accompany them towards a hope-filled future? In today's world, young people are navigating profound existential pressures that leave many feeling unmoored, unseen, and uncertain about their place in the rapidly changing and often fractured global landscape. Research shows that youth increasingly experience deep intra and interpersonal conflicts, existential emptiness, and disorientation as societal structures and symbolic frameworks that once offered coherence grow more fragile. At the same time, the cultural logic of neoliberal capitalism, marked by commodification, spectacle, and the erosion of meaning, intensifies feelings of alienation and fosters a drift towards nihilism among young people seeking purpose and belonging. Their constant exposure to global suffering through digital media further amplifies this overwhelm, leaving many young people feeling powerless in the face of crises that appear too vast to touch, much less transform, and contributing to an existential vacuum characterized by anxiety, hopelessness, and a sense of disconnection from meaningful action. Against this backdrop, the mission of Catholic colleges to incarnate love becomes not only countercultural, but essential. We are called to create communities where young people encounter hope, rediscover their God-given dignity, claim their agency, and are accompanied in the sacred work of meaning-making, so that through education rooted in love, they may come to believe again in the possibility of a world made whole, discover their distinctive gifts, and acquire the skills to take their place in working towards that wholeness. So how do we go about this work? I'm going to share from my experience at Seattle University. I want to be clear, I'm so aware that Catholic colleges and universities have such different contexts. But over the last couple of years in my role as Vice President for Mission Integration at my institution, I have had the privilege to work with amazing team members who have helped me to see more clearly the importance of the culture we create in our institutions. We understand our work as helping cultivate a campus culture reflective of the charism of the founding religious community, a campus culture of care where there is a sense of belonging for all members, that honors and appreciates diversity and uniqueness of persons, encourages dialogue across difference, and creates opportunities for laughter and joy. So how do we create classrooms for inclusion that make for genuine dialogue possible? How might we do this? How might this work? How about maybe creating a list of class norms that invite students to listen first, to give the most generous interpretation of what they hear. And if they hear something with which they disagree, begin with curiosity and seek to understand what is intended by the speaker. And if they have a counterpoint or remain at a point of disagreement, offer their point in love, right? With a desire to arrive at truth rather than to prove the other wrong, that they might be open to having their minds changed. Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti notes that in a true spirit of dialogue, we grow in our ability to grasp the significance of what others say and do, even if we cannot accept it as our own conviction. When students experience these habits across courses, they begin to appreciate how diversity of perspectives and experiences are gifts in the search for truth. Oh, develop rituals for attention. Begin meetings and classes with reflection, maybe a moment of silence or centering. I know that sometimes it can get dangerous because these can become performative, right? But if we cultivate the habit of slowing down and being present in a class or in a meeting, it can have a profound impact on what transpires. With tiny practices, we can train a Marian posture of attention, honest inquiry, and courageous consent. We need to develop spaces for reflection and pause. From students to faculty, staff, and administrators, I often hear about how they are overwhelmed and feel overworked. So much so that the effort to complete tasks and projects, even work they feel called to do, become draining and pull them away from connecting to their deepest why. The opportunities we create can be as simple as a 30-minute Friday afternoon guided reflection for students that invite those present to review the week, to become aware of those moments where they found joy and a sense of purpose, as well as those moments where they struggled to be their best selves. Such reflections can be an opportunity to deepen one's awareness of grace and moments of encounter with the divine, as well as moments of turning away from God. They can be a day away for silence at the end of a semester for faculty, to reflect on moments in their teaching where they came most alive, to have the time to relish this moment and to grow in awareness of what made it life-giving. In these kinds of practices that ground us amid what feels like chaos in our world, this is where we find the capacity to know our why. Often these are the very things we most readily let go of, though, in the business of our schedules. Yet in these times, I have found myself becoming aware that it is time set aside for prayer and reflection, entrusting myself to God, that I am reminded of God's desire to incarnate love and begin to discern what that means for me. And creating such spaces for our students, faculty, and other members of the college community is an important way that a Catholic college incarnates love and empowers its members to do the same. We incarnate love in our curriculum, one that integrates rigorous academic with encounter, discernment, and imagination oriented towards the common good. What I'm about to say, I'm not saying just because I'm a theologian. We need a theologically informed core. Not just offering theology classes. We need to protect spaces where theology converses with philosophy, the arts, and the sciences, not to police belief, but to practice public reasoning about purpose and meaning. Our courses should welcome honest skeptics and devout students alike, help engineers think about equity, poets about responsibility, economists about mercy. This is only possible if there are spaces for interdisciplinary conversations among faculty. That includes the contributions of theologians, among others versed in the Catholic intellectual tradition. One of the things that has been most enlivening for me is convening faculty from across disciplines to discuss salient social issues, where each is invited to bring their disciplinary expertise to help broaden the collective's understanding of the issue. It is in these spaces that I introduce faculty who are unfamiliar with Catholic theology, Catholic social thought, to the richness of the Catholic intellectual tradition. These are opportunities for faculty to practice the kind of dialogue I described earlier. I have found that in these kinds of interdisciplinary learning communities, that many come to experience the mission, not just in the intellectual work itself that they do together, but also in the community that is created. I believe that the academic project of a Catholic college also includes introducing students to the really real. That is the reality beyond their textbooks and their screens. Creating opportunities for encounter both for students through community-engaged learning and for faculty through support for community-engaged scholarship can be transformative. It is relationships with immigrants who are living in fear and communities that feel targeted that help me move beyond ideological commitments to see the human cost of the present moment and understand the importance of understanding the Church's teaching on migration. These immigrants and these communities are often within the walls of our institutions too. Conversations with those who are without housing yet working full-time can challenge oversimplified narratives. Encountering the shame of parents who go to food banks to receive help to feed their children can break open the hearts of students, helping them to reflect on their experience, to seek better understanding of the circumstances that lead to such situations, to discern what is stirring within them, and to empower them to make love visible in their personal response. And this is an institutional response of incarnating love. If a Catholic college is to incarnate love, it must hire and form leaders who understand that they are leading an institution called to this mission. They must understand they are not simply leaders at a college, they are leaders at a Catholic college. And in St. Mary's case, they are leaders of a Catholic women's college. Hiring for mission doesn't mean just hiring Catholics, but hiring those who are open, if not eager, to contribute to the Catholic mission of the institution. With the predominant lay leadership of Catholic institutions, the need to form leaders who are not only experts in their profession, but mission leaders of the institution is critical. Critical, critical, critical. I believe that formation includes knowing the story of the founders of the religious order, the story of the founders of the institution. It includes learning about their distinct charism, which shapes the mission of the college. It should include introduction to the Catholic intellectual tradition, Catholic social thought, the theological grounding of the institution's stated values and commitments. Whether staff, faculty, senior leaders, or trustees, it is important to help them translate this mission into practice. At Seattle University, we have for many years offered numerous opt-in formation programs. These have generally been well received and deeply formative for those who opt in. So with more and more of the faculty, staff, and administrators having less and less experience or familiarity with the institution's educational tradition, we're shifting our strategy to working directly with schools and colleges with different operational units to bring mission programming directly to them, tailoring these for what would be most helpful for their teams. For faculty, we have mission programming focused on pedagogy, on introducing term faculty to the institution's educational tradition, on engaged scholarship, and on learning about the broader Catholic educational tradition of the religious sponsors and of the university itself. We're creating developmental models for formation based on the various roles of the university. We're also learning that we need to create strategies to hardwire mission formation into policy with the hope that some level of mission formation will become an expectation of all those who work at the institution. To continue to advance a Catholic college educational mission, it is important to consistently work towards developing a shared understanding of that mission. One of the most life-giving roles I've held is as inaugural director of the Institute for Catholic Thought and Culture. So the ICTC, I had the opportunity to engage faculty, staff, and students in the ways that I've described. I also had the opportunity to share the resources of the university with the local church and the local community. We inaugurated a public lecture that drew Catholics from across the Archdiocese and other community members to hear from national and international scholars on topics such as religion and science, the papacy of Pope Francis, the Catholic commitment to interreligious dialogue, racism and the church, and more. The ICTC continues to be an important convener of the local community to share the gifts of the Catholic intellectual tradition that can help communities navigate the challenges of our times. It also partners with local Catholic organizations to host annual immigration summits, Laudato Si summits, and we've begun working with the Black Catholic Advisory Circle of the Archdiocese for an annual conference. Parishes and local faith-based nonprofits bring the richness of their work to the university and draw from the university's resources as a place of scholarship and research. Finally, we incarnate love in the decisions we make as an institution, as leaders and administrators. We know that budgets are moral documents. The strategic priorities we pursue speak to our values. The policies we put in place tell us who we are. Might asking certain questions when making key decisions help Catholic colleges incarnate love? Questions like, whose needs are being prioritized? Are there groups who might be disproportionately harmed or excluded by this decision? Does this proposal address barriers experienced by our most vulnerable students? If resources are being reduced, what safeguards or accompaniment strategies are in place to protect the most vulnerable? How does this proposal contribute to the well-being, formation, or development of students, faculty, and staff? Does it strengthen community care and a sense of belonging? In conclusion, I just want to share with you, I often find myself imagining the women and men religious who founded many of the Catholic colleges and universities in the United States. I find myself thinking about how each said a courageous yes to God's call to participate in the work of incarnating love, not just by entering religious life, but also by their work of founding schools. In this moment, I think of the four sisters who heard the Annunciation to make God's love present to the world in Father Zorin's invitation to them to leave Le Mans, France, and start a school not too far from here, which would be the seedling for what is now St. Mary's College. I imagine there must have been honest inquiry as to the viability of this project that was coupled with an abiding faith that led to courageous consent to start a school. What I have learned about women religious, I had the privilege of working with Sisters of Mercy at University of Detroit Mercy, is their attentiveness to the reality before them and their responsiveness to that reality. The little I know about the Sisters of the Holy Cross suggests to me this is true for them as well. This is how they incarnate love. This was their yes to God's call to them as individuals and as community. The establishment of the school and the work of the school was to make God's love visible to the students and the community that it serves. I imagine that there is something in religious life that would naturally bring one back to that mission, even in the midst of turmoil and hard decisions. Today, higher education confronts many challenges on many fronts, from the culture war on higher ed to the enrollment cliff and declining attendance. They not only need to attend to their educational missions, but Catholic colleges also need to attend to federal policies and market forces, right? At the same time, Catholic colleges have a distinct mission that can be the North Star that guides their decisions in precarious times. From investments in co-curricular activities to the core curriculum that's developed. From budget to hiring, from pedagogy to faculty engagement, from reward systems to board agendas. If the Catholic college mission is to incarnate love, how are decisions being guided by that mission? How will the institution discern how it is called to incarnate love in its particular context? How will it prepare its students, faculty, staff, and administrators and trustees to understand and be animated by the mission so that they're able to courageously consent to participate in it? I leave you with these questions to ponder for St. Mary's. But know that I will be asking these questions with you for my home institution. Thank you.
Come up and grab a mic. Oh,
Sorry, I dropped it.
no. Catherine, that was wonderful. Thank you. What a long to-do list she has given us, but it is good work. We have some time for responses, conversation together, questions. To whom may I pass the mic? Hey, Sarah.
Catherine, I echo Molly's thanks for a really fantastic talk that's given us a lot to think about. I really appreciated you talking and elevating the role of community engaged learning and scholarship in and its role in Catholic higher education. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why you see that particular type of learning and scholarship as essential?
So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my reflections and ideas about what Catholic higher education should look like were very much shaped by my own lived experience as a student at a Catholic institution. And one of the things that I experienced as a student is the power of those moments of encounter with what I've been calling the really real, especially the reality of those on the margins, which I feel we are called to serve in a special way, right? Because those encounters on the one hand move our hearts, our students' hearts, right? In a way that text is not going to. And it somehow touches them in a way, hopefully, that will then animate their curiosity, their desire to understand why certain situations exist. There's an investment, I think, that comes from relationship, right? And for me, in my own experience, engaging with landless farm workers, for example, when I was in the Philippines, the desire to understand the circumstances, right, of those farmers, right, and why they're in that situation, animated my own work to understand the agrarian reform movement that was happening in the country at the time, but to understand the complexities that were at play. Right? For example, the way that lenders would lend money to these farmers even after, when they have acquired their land, that leads to debt, that then leads to them selling the land. So there's complexity. But the desire to go that deep was animated by the relationship and the encounter. And I think we owe our students that, right? I think at the end of the day, I feel there's a danger to not having those moments of encountering what's really happening in the world, because it's very easy to fall into ideology. But I think reality checks us on that.
Hey, Nicole, Director of the Center for Faith Action and Ministry. The mic is yours.
Thank you again so much, Catherine. I'm curious that coming from a staff perspective, and we often talk in our office about this engagement of heart that accompanies the engagement of the mind in the classroom. I'm thinking a lot these days about just sort of the reality of the siloing that's felt between staff and faculty. And so I'm wondering, like, what are some of your tips and tricks and words of wisdom, perhaps, for like how I as a staff member can support this kind of engagement for my faculty colleagues, or like what kinds of ways in which I as a staff member might work collaboratively with my faculty colleagues in this sort of shared mission work.
I love that question, and I'm going to find myself, I realize, coming back to a similar answer to the early one, relationships, right? So as a faculty member for many years, I work very closely with campus ministry, right? Depending on context, in my first context, we literally had retreats as part of the course that we taught. Now, I don't know if that can be done here, but that's what we did. And we did that always in collaboration with campus ministry at the time. Now, a lot of my colleagues actually that are part of the campus ministry team also teach a course or two in theology, right? Because they have they have the academic training that allows them to teach in the core. And that builds relationships between the faculty member, between the staff person and the department. But honestly, I do think we just reach out. I gave a talk at the CTS, and this is, I think, how I got the invitation here, is because Julia was there. And, one of the things I said is, don't wait for permission, right? Don't wait to be invited. Reach out, build what you dream, right? If you have a capacity to dream a certain kind of relationship, if you have a capacity to dream a collaborative program with, say, theology, right? Do it. We worked with campus ministry, for example, during the Syrian refugee crisis, where we had a panel of theologians and Bible scholars speak about the different faith traditions and what they say about migration. But this was a campus ministry event, right? But we brought in the expertise of members of the theology department. So I think there's a lot of different ways. I mean, bringing together, for me, it's the integration of the community engaged learning that's animated by reflection, right? That maybe can be led by members of the campus ministry team, but also the critical social analysis that I think faculty can provide, right? Pulling all of that together is the sweet spot.
Sister Eva.
I'm asking a very unfair question, given that I am now retired and don't have to do anything other than write my poems no, and participate in the congregation's efforts to, we're planning this walk in the nation on March 28th, and we'll be doing all of that. But when I was a faculty member, I would periodically get overwhelmed by the fact that my discipline was shifting like crazy in order to integrate new writers, different writers from the writers I had when I was in graduate school, which in my case, I was an early modernist, meant much more women, but I'd never read any of them. So there's that project. And then if we want to have a genuine interdisciplinary course, then I have to learn the discipline somehow of the faculty member who's with whom I'm being interdisciplinary. Which in my case, way back, we have these tandem courses, and the person I was with was theology. And I ended up reading a ton of Thomas Merton, and because that was her field, and Thomas Merton came into everything, no matter what we were doing. So, and the amount of work that this can become was a severe challenge to my contemplative life as a Sister of the Holy Cross. And I felt genuinely burdened, and I think many of my colleagues did as well, who were trying to do that. And what I ask of you is what ways do you have of bringing about faculty participation in the different ways of thinking about mission of the Catholic College that would somehow make the amount of work bearable, because we're asking people to do, and I'm speaking as a faculty member, but I'm sure this happens elsewhere in the college as well, when different groups try and do things together, and you have to have knowledge of the two or more things that you're trying to bring together. Have you discovered any ways to make this labor not just of love, which wears you out, but also healthy, in terms of allowing you to be a human person?
That's a beautiful question. And I don't know that I can imagine how I can help a person be an expert in two different fields. But what I can say is some of the spaces that I have loved the most have been bringing faculty together from different disciplines and learning from one another across the disciplines. And hopefully, as they get to, very often they don't know one another and they don't know that they have some shared research interest, right? My hope has always been that in those conversations, something is catalyzed in them that might surface a particular research question that they can pursue. So it's meaningful for their own work. The big dream is to have faculty come together and realize, oh, there's some research project we can collaborate on. Right. I've had the beautiful experience of teaching a religion and science course with the then chair of the physics department for many years for our honors program. And it does take more time, right? Not only are we showing up in the classes all the time, but we're debriefing in a way that you wouldn't have to debrief. And we were told it was the only genuinely interdisciplinary course that was offered at the institution. So that it does take investment, right? It does take investment and it is difficult. But I also, as I listened to you, sister, I also found myself just really being aware of the fact that very often our busyness, right? Our busyness compounded on busyness really makes the labor that much harder. And one of the things that I'm trying to create more and more of are actually spaces for faculty to step back, right? I had the privilege of participating in it was a Lilly grant funded kind of experiment where faculty were invited to reflect on teaching at its best. It was a simple exercise. Each one was invited to write a very short, specific story about a teaching moment that they felt was teaching at its best. And then we were invited in that, I know I'm at time, we were invited. But we were invited to do that and to really do some deep reflection on that. And it helped us to become more aware what it was about teaching that we loved. And it also helped us become more aware of our pedagogy, right? Some of the things that work and don't work, and the things that actually, when we allow ourselves the space in our naturalness and our giftedness to bring into the classroom. And that moment of stepping away, I think, and re-anchoring yourself in your why, can help lighten the burden, right? I know from experience that not stopping, not slowing down, not rerouting just compounds it. No secret formula, but at the end of the day, again, relationships and moments for pause to re-anchor and remember.
I think that we could talk for a lot longer. Thank you for that very generative question. Thank you for this very good presentation. Thank you for being here with us. Perhaps some of you would like to join us tomorrow to continue engagement with these ideas at a very practical level in the form of a workshop that will happen from 10:30 to noon in Stapleton. And if you let Jessica or me know that you're coming, you'll get a link and we'll get you a Chipotle lunch. So please join us if you'd like to. Thank you for being here and making one step toward building the kind of culture, or I hope building the kind of culture that you've begun to help us envision this afternoon. Thank you so much, Catherine.